Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's event. It's great to see so many of you here. We're here to mark 1 year since the publication of the OFS's Statement of Expectations to tackle all forms of harassment and sexual misconduct in higher education. This will hopefully be a chance to discuss learning about implementing the statement, and there'll be opportunities to share provider practice as well this afternoon. The event will also be an opportunity to hear about the work we're carrying out to understand the impact of the Statement of Expectations. We have a really fantastic lineup of speakers for you today, as well as some provider videos to share practice and live examples of resources, and an opportunity to hear from OFS colleagues, leaders and practitioners in the sector, as well as a really excellent group of students who I'm really looking forward to hearing from at our panel session this afternoon, our student panel session. We've turned on the live transcription feature in Zoom, so captions are available by clicking on the CC icon. The captions are automatically generated, so there may be some errors in what is displayed on screen, but hopefully they won't be too terrible. The event is being recorded and will be made available on our website after today. We'll paste the link into the chat box to the page where the recording will be hosted. We will have a Q&A session later on this afternoon. On the panel for the Q&A will be John Blake, the OFS's Director of Fair Access and Participation, Emma Douthwaite, OFS's Safeguarding and Welfare Manager, Debra Humphris, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Brighton, and Simon Lee, Vice Chair of AMOSSHE, the Student Services Heads of Student Services Association. Please submit your questions for us using the Q&A box in Zoom and not the chat box. The chat box should be used if you would like to communicate with our events team. So please submit your questions at any time throughout the afternoon. You can submit your question anonymously if you would like, but it is helpful for us in the panel if you can include your name and organisation so these can be read out with the question. But don't worry, you can also submit anonymously, as I said. We do anticipate receiving a very high volume of questions, and we won't be able to put them all to the panel in the time we've got available, but we will read each question received and are happy to answer questions after the event. You can contact us at edi@officeforstudents.org.uk. I think that's all of the housekeeping done from me. So let's turn to our first speaker this afternoon. I would now like to introduce you to John Blake, our Director of Fair Access and Participation at the Office for Students, who is going to provide us with an introduction to the OFS's work in this area. So I'll hand over to John.
Hello, hopefully everyone can hear and see me. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Amy says, my name is John Blake and I joined the OFS in January as Director for Fair Access and Participation. Most of you will know that that role started life as Director for Fair Access, and the focus was initially very strongly on getting into university, especially our most selective institutions. Of course, it remains important that we do the work of widening access, and many of the opportunities I've had to speak with the sector in private and in public since I started the role have been focused on ensuring that we work together to both fix the leaks in and widen the pipeline from early life into higher education. I was discussing that only this morning with colleagues at Wonky's Access All Areas conference, and I'm actually still there. I'm in the basement of the Mermaid Theatre, which is why you may see some pipes behind me in the image. So we were having that conversation this morning a lot about access, but of course participation was added to my job title because what we struggle so hard to ensure all can access must also be made fit for those students to succeed. Much of the discussion of OFS's work in recent months has been focused on the academic side of success. We have recently concluded our quality consultations, laying out strong minimum expected standards for graduation and progress into rewarding careers or further study. Again, it is absolutely right to do this, but there is also an element to participation that is not about how well a student does, but what they have to go through to get out of higher education successfully at all. Academic outcomes tell us much about the work of HE providers, but not everything. I joined the Disabled Student Commission in large part because although our data suggests that students with disabilities do not achieve significantly differently from their peers, I don't think for a moment any of us believe that their experience of HE struggling to get the right learning support, pastoral guidance, or appropriate accommodation, can possibly be seen as one of equal opportunities. Conversations about access and inclusion beyond the academic can be challenging, but where the problem is less concrete, but where the problem is concrete, or at least easily definable, it is more straightforward to deal with. But the issues we are here to discuss today, whilst no less damaging, are often far harder to grapple with. In some cases, that is because although the harm is absolutely crystal clear, such as sexual violence and harassment, we still struggle as a society to face up to the sheer scale of the problem. In that case, of course, the problem is far deeper and wider than higher education. But the National Crime Survey of England and Wales suggests HE students are the occupational group most likely to experience sexual assault and domestic violence. We know that those who will be students in a few years are already experiencing levels of sexual harassment that would have been unthinkable in years past. Ofsted's rapid review last year found that half boys and 90% of girls have been sent unsolicited nude photographs, and the frequency of sexist name-calling and other harmful sexual behaviours means that for some children and young people, these are considered normal. Other groups face shocking levels of harassment. The risk of being a victim of personal hate crime is highest amongst people aged between 16 and 24. 24% of ethnic minority students in HE report experiencing racial harassment. 22% of LGB students have experienced homophobic harassment, and 60% of trans students have experienced negative comments from other students. Anti-Semitism, on campus and outside, has reclaimed a place in society we had once thought gone forever. These are stark statistics, but they almost certainly hide much wider problems. We know that girls and young women are often unwilling to discuss experiences of sexual violence because they doubt the efficacy of those charged to deal with it. Many wonder if they will even be believed. The scale of the challenge, as well as clear evidence of patchy and inadequate responses by providers, spurred the OFS into action, represented by our statement of expectations. We identified a lack of consistent and effective systems, policies, and practices to respond to reports of incidents. We also had evidence that despite the recommendations from UUK's Changing the Culture report, progress had been very slow in implementing it. OFS's own work in terms of receiving notifications from providers, our evaluation of our 119 Catalyst-funded projects across the sector, and the EHRC's inquiry into racial harassment in 2019 were all instrumental in developing the content and intervention represented by the Statement of Expectations. That is why we are here today, to discuss the work OFS and the sector have undertaken over the past year in response to those challenges, and to hear the voice of students and student representatives on this vital issue. Before we begin, I will say there is a live and proper conversation about whether and in what ways the OFS should go further to regulate these areas. As a regulator should, we are considering very carefully how we intervene in this space. Precisely because these are issues of profound importance, they are ones where ill-considered or unsustained action may cause real and lasting harm, and make it harder to take more effective action later. An independent evaluation of the impact of the Statement of Expectations is currently underway. The findings of the evaluation will help inform our decision about whether we may need to do more, including options for regulation. We therefore do not want to preempt the findings of the evaluation. The final report is due to be published in autumn 2020. Any movement forward on this will of course involve consultation, including on the detail of the Statement of Expectations. In the meantime, I will say only that universities and colleges should be reviewing their systems, policies and processes to align with the Statement of Expectations. Not because I or anyone else in the OFS wants you to, but because the students we are all here to serve need institutions they can trust to report their experiences to, and trust that they will act appropriately and sensitively in response. Thank you. I believe we now have some videos from providers setting out some of their work in relation to the Statement of Expectations. We will now show clips from the University of Leicester, University of Suffolk and the University of Bath on their practice in relation to different aspects of tackling harassment and sexual misconduct. Thank you.
Have you ever experienced hate or harassment at university?
I've definitely been harassed and made to feel like some kind of weird spectacle.
He stopped me and asked for my number, and I told him no, and he asked me why, and I just ignored him and continued walking, and then he started shouting racial remarks at me.
I often find that my thoughts are dismissed in other academic settings where I'm spoken over.
And one of them kept going on about how there are only Chinese food in the student union because of all these Chinese people. Although it wasn't directed at me per se, it was just uncomfortable to have to listen to all of that.
How did it affect you?
It made me feel quite self-conscious, and that my work was kind of being dismissed and what I had to say didn't really matter as much as other people because of who I was and the way I looked.
I just remember feeling very isolated and alone.
I've grown to become very self-conscious, especially in terms of how I speak and my pronunciation of words, even though English is my first language.
I think that it's made me feel a bit on guard most of the time, and it's also made me feel a bit disillusioned with nightlife and a lot of spaces within the university.
I get confused. Should I stay here or should I not? Where should I go? What should be my future goal?
Hello, I'm Andy Fippin. I'm Professor of Digital Rights at Bournemouth University.
And I'm Emma Bond. I am Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research at the University of Suffolk and a Professor of Socio-Technical Research. At the University of Suffolk, we developed the first online safety toolkit for universities in 2019, supported by the OFS, and we've just recently updated it in line with the Statement of Expectations.
The thing we've really focused on is the fact that for online issues, it is different. It applies to different legislation. And what we're very mindful of is the fact that there's lots of people telling universities, you need to do something about this. But what that something is often neglected. So the toolkit is very much directed to consider different aspects of online safeguarding and what universities can do to move from not having any practice to being very good at providing support for students in this area.
We know that this is a real issue for students, which is something that Katie's going to talk about. And also, we do know that the previous toolkit has been widely used by other universities. We've also had a lot of feedback about updating it. So not only is it now updated in line with the Statement of Expectations, but we've also included 2 new sections. One is around online delivery, especially post-pandemic, and the shift to that across the sector, but also we've included a new section around online issues and mental health.
My name is Vicky Madden, and I'm the Digital Safety Support Officer in the Digital Skills and Training team at the University of Edinburgh. My role was created in response to students feeling under-supported when it came to their digital safety, especially regarding issues like online harassment. Over the past 2.5 years, we've developed a range of online and in-person training, as well as openly licensed web resources to help students and staff stay safe online. When we began our digital safety initiative, we quickly realized how pervasive the issue of online incivility is across UK higher education, and just how little this is being discussed. To hold meaningful conversations at the University of Edinburgh, we formed a digital safety steering group comprising staff across the organisation with an interest in promoting digital citizenship. One of the first things we did as a group was to measure our institutional policies using the University of Suffolk's Higher Education Online Safeguarding Self-Review tool. This exercise revealed the need to better embed consideration for online elements in our institutional practices, a project we are currently working towards.
Hi, my name is Katie Tyrrell. I am a research fellow and a postgraduate researcher at the University of Suffolk. and my research is investigating students' use of digital technologies in their everyday lives. From the conversations that I've had with students, it's become increasingly apparent that they are facing a multitude of difficulties in the online space whilst at university. I've spoken to students who have experienced online abuse in the form of sexual harassment in online spaces, but also some of our previous works really highlighted that digital incivility is quite commonplace amongst university communities. One of the key messages from students is that university responses to online abuse are inconsistent and in many cases non-existent, and students don't feel able to or know how to report experiences of online abuse to their institutions. Students aren't just occupying physical spaces, they are navigating online spaces as well, and the OFS Statement of Expectations really highlights that we need to be able to support students who experience abuse, irrespective of the medium in which that occurs.
Hi, I'm Akan. I do business and I'm from Amnesty.
Hi, my name is Finley. I study international development with economics and I'm from Amnesty Society.
Hi, I'm Rose Stevenson, Policy and Projects Manager.
Hi, I'm Tamsin. I'm on the committee for Amnesty and I'm studying politics.
Hi, I'm Kenza. I'm studying politics and international relations and I'm on the committee of Amnesty as well.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm Deputy Director of HR.
Did the Statement of Expectations motivate you guys to develop your anti-harassment work?
So I think we were in quite a good position already. We had 2 rounds of hefty catalyst funding for anti-harassment work previously. So we've done quite a lot with our original Never OK project, and in terms of our policies, we've already done a big rewrite of our policy work. So I think we were in quite a good place anyway when the statement came out. I think for us it was looking at the real detail of some of those expectations, things like exactly how do we respond to anonymous reporting, how much information do we give about data sharing, etc. So I think it was the detailed level that really helped us to kind of push on our work.
And I think just going into that detail really helped us. We'd had 3 years of kind of working through it and learning by practice and taking best practice from other places, but it was just nice to have a framework document that we could test, had we got it right.
Yeah, so you check alongside the expectations to check that it all fit with what you were doing.
Yeah, that was very, very useful.
So did you encounter any challenges with following the Statement of Expectations?
Sure. Yes, I think our biggest challenge really over the last 12 months has been some recruitment challenges. We've had a restructure, various things have happened. We haven't had someone in post, and I think that makes it really clear that you cannot do this as an edge of your desk job. It's really, really important and needs to be properly resourced. We're very lucky that we do have permanent and I would say now an appropriate level of resource for those roles, and recruitment is underway now. So I'm really hopeful that for the next academic year we'll have 2 really good people in post who've got the appropriate amount of time and can really take some of this work forward. But it's certainly been difficult to do that without those people.
Yeah, would like to add anything in terms of challenges that we faced?
Yeah, I think in terms of implementing the expectations, I think it's just knowing about them. I mean, because 3 out of 4 of us weren't aware of the explanation at all, and there's nothing we can do to say if the university is doing well on behalf of the expectations if we don't know what the expectations are. So I think it's just communicating what the university does and what the expectations are to show the university is actually doing a good job. Like I've heard you speak and you're doing really, really good things, but if the students don't know about that, they don't have the courage to come forward.
So as students, do you think the Statement of Expectations will benefit us in the future?
I think using it as a guideline is good, but as like university or in general, the university has to specify and like have it in a more detailed format to really like make sure that the students understand in the like what's exactly going on. Again, that's going to be more comforting to know that.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
that. Just a reminder, we have recorded this event, including those videos. I'm aware the sound was a little bit quiet in that last video. That's why we put some extra captioning on there. But it's all recorded. You will be able to access those again later. I really like the diversity represented in those videos, hearing from sort of leaders and people who've been developing resources at Suffolk, a specific resource created using student voices at Leicester, and then a really interesting discussion between practitioners and students. And I really took away the fact that the students didn't know about the statement of expectations, and so we have been working hard on putting together some student-facing resources to try and help communicate to students exactly what those statements, what the expectations are, and how they can get involved with those. And that moves us nicely on actually to our panel discussion with our fabulous student representatives today. We're really pleased to be joined by the colleagues today who are going to be sharing with us their views on tackling harassment and sexual misconduct, and some of the distance travelled, I guess, over the last year or so. So please, can I ask you at this point for the panelists to turn on their cameras? I think we've just popped in the chat who's joining us, but hopefully we'll see them now turn on the cameras. So as they're doing that, I will say we are being joined by Natasha Dummer, Campaigns Director from the NUS, Sophie O'Sullivan, Co-Director of Wellbeing and Support at Not On My Campus, Maisha Islam, who works on student engagement at the University of Winchester and is also a member of the OFS's student panel, and Amanda Sefton, Head of Campaigns at the Union of Jewish Students. Could I just check that we've got, I can see you, fantastic. Sorry, you scrolled along on my screen. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each one of you in turn to provide a response to a question I'm going to throw at you. And the first question we're going to explore, and I'm really interested to hear your views on, is really a kind of opener to set the scene for us, really, and for our audience. What are some of the issues relating to harassment and sexual misconduct that are of concern to students right now? And I'm going to ask Natasha to lead off on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me today. So I'm going to focus on this kind of, for me, 3 live issues and concepts that are coming through really strongly among students that are kind of actively campaigning on sexual harassment and violence at the moment. And the first one is really increasingly the recognition of the limitations of policy, process and systems. There has been a lot of movement in this area, and this really needs to be applauded. But I think that we're increasingly recognising that what we need is a culture that upholds them in the spirit in which they were intended. So an example of this would be the government's recent kind of pledge for universities to commit to no longer using NDAs. Well, what we're hearing from students is that the culture of silencing still exists within institutions that may have signed up to those. So you may still hear staff members suggesting, or providing strong recommendations that it might be good not to take this further, or it might not be good for the student to kind of, for other people to know about what happened to them. So, this culture of silencing still exists, and we're increasingly learning that we need sort of values and principles guiding our work rather than pure policies. The second thing is a kind of growing skepticism of policing and security as a response to sexual violence. I think the murders of Sarah Everard, Beaver Henry and Nicole Smallman at the hands of the police have really impacted on students. And we're seeing increasingly low levels of confidence in police among all women and non-binary people, which is a new development because previously I think we would always point to some communities that had lower levels of trust. So we really need to start thinking about what a response that doesn't involve the police and doesn't involve security look like if we want to think about a response that that works for everyone. And then the final point I'll make is really kind of, it follows on from that point, which is that I think that we're seeing kind of less of a focus on the crime committed and more of a shift towards focusing on the harm caused. because the former kind of centres the perpetrator, and it centres the institution sometimes, and really that's at the expense of centering the survivor, which is, so I think a kind of harm-focused response is really where students want to see results being put.
Thank you, Natasha. That was a great opener for us. I wonder whether I could bring Sophie in next, as I feel like you've probably got something really relevant to build on there in terms of what Natasha's input is around silence, around sort of victims, the centering of victim survivors, use of NDAs, etc. Sophie.
Honestly, Natasha could not have said it better myself. So now I'm going to try and follow that. Kind of what I wanted to focus on really was that culture of silence within universities. And that's kind of what we're seeing as Not On My Campus. So what we are is a network that connects student societies together who are campaigning in this area. And most people that we're engaging with at the moment are working on the misuse of NDAs and their use in harassment, abuse and discrimination cases. And I have never been privileged to be in an audience like this before, in front of so many senior professionals in the university sector. And I kind of wanted to use my time talking about the issues relating to harassment to kind of talk about what that culture of silence is, to implore those who haven't signed the pledge to do so, and those who have signed the pledge to really think about removing all equivalent clauses, because NDAs are not the only clauses that exist. There are some arguments around the positive aspect of NDAs, but I'm going to seek to disprove some of them right now. So one of them is that they're really necessary for the survivor to have their matter handled confidentially. But a survivor does not need to promise confidentiality to their perpetrator in order to gain confidentiality for themselves. There's another myth that NDAs help people move on, but that could not be further from the case. When it comes to sexual violence, one of the key areas within which healing is achieved is being able to talk about your experience. And people under NDAs can't talk to counsellors, they can't talk to friends, they can't talk to family. And there's this constant feeling of anxiety and the threat of potential legal action that hangs over them, that creates a really palpable secondary fear and trauma. So I personally have not been subject to an NDA, but Not On My Campus recently hosted a webinar with someone who has, and that's Zelda Perkins, who was one of the first women to break her NDA with Harvey Weinstein. And she talked with us about how her NDA made her feel. She felt shame in feeling that she had enabled the continuation of his abuse, that she'd buried the information, she felt personally guilty, which is obviously completely wrong. She had done nothing wrong. She had been pressured into signing this NDA. And what that kind of shows is the only person that the NDA is protecting is the perpetrator, who can then move on and potentially abuse others. Staff and students who sign NDAs also have feelings of a loss of confidence in the system, a loss of belief in legal practice, lack of academic motivation. It's very difficult for people to explain potential drops in their academic achievement because of the trauma they faced without fear of breaking their NDAs. Now, not all NDAs actually necessitate this level of confidentiality. The problem is not with the letter of what they're signing, but the symbolic nature of what's being signed and what survivors believe they're signing. And they live with that trauma of being silenced, and they relive that trauma every single day. And student activists are working tirelessly in this area against some universities who have said that they fundamentally won't sign the pledge. And I'm just really here to implore you to please sign the pledge. And if you have, amazing, thank you so much. But could you also consider removing the use of double-edged confidentiality agreements, compromise agreements, non-disparagement agreements, specifically in the use of harassment and discrimination cases, because of the systemic culture of silence that it promotes? Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. A very clear call to action there for the sector. I'm going to move us on to AMOSSHE. Would you be okay just to go next to share your thoughts on that first question for us?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I'll try my best to follow Sophie and Natasha, who had just excellent responses. But hi, colleagues. I hope you're well, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me, and to OFS colleagues for the invite. So I think for me, as a visibly Muslim woman of colour, issues relating to harassment and misconduct are probably ones that are quite obvious and long-standing. I think the first issue kind of relates to what Sophie and Natasha have kind of mentioned, is confidence, in the sense that reporting misconduct, I think, requires a level of empowerment that I think particularly minoritized individuals don't always feel entitled to, but also confidence in the system to kind of appropriately support those issues related to harassment and misconduct. As John had mentioned, that EHRC report that looked into racial discrimination at universities, we know around a quarter of our racially minoritized students are facing harassment, but many of these incidences are not reported, which kind of skews what the reality is like at individual universities. I think those issues stem from, cultures that either implicitly or explicitly kind of reinforce that messaging. Again, what kind of Natasha and Sophie were talking about, that misconduct is not dealt with kind of swiftly or appropriately, and they come at the expense of the survivor of the misconduct. And so there's so much emotional baggage that comes with, going through those reporting mechanisms, the processes involved that can be either quite mysterious or just complicated. So I think tackling those issues is super important. But also, dealing with multiple responsibilities as a student, most of the times it's easier to not go through those arduous processes and just kind of suffer in silence. So I think, summing up what all three of us have kind of said so far, it's confidence, it's culture, and it's convenience, or the sort of the lack thereof. That are some of the issues kind of relating to harassment and sexual misconduct that are of concern to our students, not just right now, but have been historical concerns for such a long time.
Aisha, I'm really hearing you on that point around confidence and empowerment as well. I think that's a theme we could probably pick up again, to think about how as institutions and how as a regulator supporting institutions we can really help to build that confidence and student empowerment, to speak up when things, not to be silenced, not to be convenient, and to speak up when things go wrong. And move on to Amanda.
Hi everyone. So just want to say thank you, Sophie, Maisha, and Natasha. Your answers have been incredible and so inspiring to hear. I feel like everything I was going to say has been taken, so I'm going to try and follow up. But I'm Amanda Sefton. I'm from the Union of Jewish Students. We're the representative body for over 9,000 Jewish students on campus across the UK and Ireland. I kind of wanted to touch on different issues that we're seeing when dealing with specifically anti-Semitic incidents on campus. A lot of it is inconsistency across different institutions on how they deal with it. Some of that comes into the kind of the silencing, but what the biggest thing that we're seeing is Jewish students will report, and actually the process of the complaints doesn't allow them to feel supported. We're consistently seeing the same response from institutions that they're not allowed to find out the outcome. And I guess this is similar to what Sophie was talking about before, with this idea of silencing and not being able to move on and be able to talk about it. But how are the victims able to move on and kind of get through the rest of their time at university if they're not even sure what has happened to the perpetrator? And that's something really difficult that Jewish students are struggling with. And sometimes it comes even down to, they just want to know, has an apology been made? Has a conversation been had with them? Specifically, we've seen incidents with academics where they have made comments in the classroom and they're unaware of if that academic has been spoken to, and they're expected to kind of just keep going back into that lecture, back into that seminar, facing the perpetrator, whether it was direct or indirect anti-Semitism. But that's a really difficult thing for Jewish students to have to face. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on is also kind of the minimal prevention we're actually seeing on campuses. Some campuses we have seen have started taking incredible strides in kind of the EDI workshops, making it compulsory during Freshers' Weeks, and different modules that students have to take, and that covers racial discrimination, kind of understanding what isn't okay in terms of sexual harassment and things like that, and looking at all those issues. But it's not done enough, and I think prevention and that education piece is something we really need to be moving forward on.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm really interested in that point about, and perhaps it's something we can pick up later on, around the lack of support for students who make a report. So we want to build, and I think that speaks to the confidence and empowerment piece that both Sophie and Maisha were talking about as well, into like Because if you don't want to make a report, if you think actually I'm then going to be left on my own, or I'm not going to receive the support to go through what is quite a difficult process for many students. And also I'm interested in the point you made about prevention activity actually and how that's sort of some patchy practice there. Obviously the first part of the statement of the OFS's statement of expectations is all around prevention. It's all around taking that kind of whole systems approach to setting a culture, training staff, training students, having policy, having all the right pieces in place. And the second part of the statement, points 5 to 7, is all around response. It's around having that reporting and supporting system in place to take students through the whole journey of making a report and undergoing, you know, sort of investigatory procedures. So I have a slightly more positive question, because I am an internal optimist, and I'm interested in your views about what do you think positive change in this area might look like for students, might look like and feel like. And I'm going to switch the order up a little bit. So Amanda, would you mind opening the comments on that? So I'm aware you went last time, and I'm sure you had all your great points made by others first. So do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I guess the first thing is touching on what I talked about just before, is this kind of education piece. And I think that comes from the raising awareness side of actually what is happening, so people are aware of the issues happening on campus in terms of kind of everyday, like all students, staff, and things like that. I think training and education around not only what to do in a specific situation, if you've experienced it, but also how to be an active bystander, how to support your friends who might be going through kind of experiencing racial discrimination, or who have experienced sexual harassment, and supporting them in the best way to do that. And even with that kind of support piece, within universities, I think one of the things that they really should be focusing on with the complaints process is that it needs to be victim focused. That comes down to things like reducing the burden of proof of the victim. So an example would be, from what we've seen with kind of dealing with anti-Semitic incidents, a Jewish student is walking down the street and is screamed at derogatory terms, and they go make a complaint at the university, but the institution then asks them for the ID of that student, the time and place it happened, kind of all this, some really technical details that a student who's just experienced a hate crime, in that situation, they're not going to turn around to the perpetrator and say, can you just not run away for a second so I can take a photo of you, so I can report you. And it's things like that which I think will massively help victims want to come forward and speak up about it, but also support them through the process, so that they don't feel everything is on them to have to take it forward and have results.
Thanks, Amanda. I think you've made the point really well there about how that can be quite a re-traumatizing event as well, to have to sort of constantly relive it. And you know, in all the sort of horrible details, when actually someone just needs a sort of quite a trauma-informed response to what they're saying. Maisha, could I come to you next?
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thank you, Amanda. Some points that I was going to touch on as well. So I think some positive action measures, like you mentioned, Amy, had been identified as best practice in the OFS Statement of Expectations, and that accompanying student guide that I think was recently kind of brought out. But expanding on this, I think there's something just to say for universities really to encourage and shout about the use of their kind of report and support systems, and then see an increase in the number of reportings as actually a positive step forward. We know that issues, related to harassment and sexual misconduct are so widespread, as John had kind of mentioned in his opening address. So seeing an increase should signal to a university the true extent of those issues in their context, whilst also showing that individuals at their, in their universities have confidence in the system to kind of support them rather than suffer in silence, as you'd mentioned. I think another positive change I would like to see is just exactly what Amanda had mentioned, is just burden, and what you were touching on as well, Amy. If anyone has gone through the procedure of, procedures relating to harassment, they know how bureaucratic, burdensome and emotionally draining it is. As you mentioned, you're constantly reliving trauma is unbelievably horrible. And when you're doing that, I don't know, 2 to 3 different times with different panels or you know, whichever staff member, if you're being bounced around, it's extremely unfair and, you know, really off-putting for a student. So I'd really like to see universities recognize that in a way that really does alleviate that kind of problem. Alternatively, as part of kind of demystifying the processes around harassment and sexual misconduct, students need to understand very clearly like what is expected you know, of them through that kind of process. What are the realistic timeframes that they can, you know, get back, hear back from, you know, any staff member from, and easily accessible kind of staff members or, you know, FAQ sheets that answer those questions, you know, at a very kind of accessible kind of time. They need to be assured as best as possible that negative repercussions are not going to follow them through their university journey, especially if you're constantly seeing that perpetrator in these kinds of settings. So I think in that way, involving student voice into the kind of processes, understanding what are the barriers that they are facing and what positive change could look like for them in their local context then becomes really important. We utilize student voice mechanisms in many aspects of universities, you know, experiences. So why not here within these processes too? And I think if universities see these issues as really being connected to both student and staff kind of retention and success, then more can be invested into, you know, really supporting those experiences.
Thanks, Maisha. I love your point about shout about reporting systems. Unless everyone knows they're there, there's little point to them. So I love that point. Thank you. Sophie, can I turn to you?
Yes, very quickly, before I start my answer to the question, I just want to clarify. I realised that I did not define what non-disclosure agreements are. Just very quickly before I answer, when I talk about NDAs, I'm not talking about confidentiality clauses during an investigation. What I'm talking about is an in perpetuity clause at the end of an investigation that prevents either party from ever talking about the outcome of the case ever. So a victim can't seek support, abuser can't move on. A victim can't seek support, but an abuser can move on without needing to disclose the outcome. And when I talk about confidentiality, it's just that sometimes NDAs are renamed confidentiality clauses, but framed in the same way as an NDA. Sorry, just wanted to make that clear because I think I caused some confusion. In answer to the question of what positive change would look like and what's starting to look like, is that within Not On My Campus, we're already hearing from a lot of students who already have training at their universities, which was a key part of the statement of expectations. And this is great to see. It's one of the most effective mechanisms at prevention, which is something that we at Not On My Campus really emphasize. But the issue that we're finding is the current format of these trainings are usually some form of quiz, like a consent-based quiz really is the most common one. Now, this is a really good first step in terms of understanding what consent is, but a short quiz is not going to fundamentally change a culture. So what positive change looked like for us is universities understanding and putting into practice training that engages with the concepts that actually perpetuate sexual violence. Because fundamentally, sexual violence is not a crime about lack of consent or a crime of miscommunication. It's an exercise of power, and that power can be exercised on both an individual and a systemic level. And what I mean by that is that because of systemic biases, such as patriarchy, for example, white supremacy, heteronormativity, there are those in society who are viewed as inherently lesser by those in positions of privilege. And we know that marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by sexual violence. Training, and I mean meaningful training, allows individuals to engage with their own biases and to understand what sexual violence actually is. For example, because sexual violence is so insidious and linked to those existing power structures, some people don't even understand that what's happening to them is sexual violence. And on the other side, a lot of the times individuals don't understand that what they're doing is wrong because they feel so entitled to that other person's body and their dignity due to those systemic issues. Now, this doesn't absolve an individual of responsibility, but kind of shows where it comes from and how we can address it. For example, they may not view unconsensual touching as a crime because they're part of a group of friends who do that all the time because patriarchy objectifies women. All of their friends take drunk girls home because this is not rape, because rape is a big scary word that only applies in really violent situations with strangers in alleyways. And these types of thoughts and behaviours are really common, and they need real and meaningful engagement to address them. And therefore, the question is, how do universities solve the issues of systemic oppressions that have existed for hundreds or thousands of years? And it's actually not as insurmountable of a mountain as it seems. For example, as has already been discussed, active bystander training, which could be renewed every year for all students or student leaders if there's not the funding available to offer it to all students, which teaches students the nuances of harassment and discrimination, how to intervene in situations to prevent them from occurring. And we're seeing this across a couple of universities who are implementing this already. Interactive compulsory consent workshops, which make students really engage with what consent actually means and what the implications of non-consensual activity actually means. Training that meaningfully engages with systemic forms of oppression, such as anti-racism training. There are some amazing providers that provide sessions for sports teams and societies to address lad culture, organisations like Beyond Equality, for example, which address issues of systemic patriarchy. Good night out training for nightlife staff to help them recognise and intervene in situations of harassment and discrimination to make student nightlife that little bit safer. And I think the fact that universities are already starting to engage with training is so positive. It's just, if the focus could just be focused a little bit more on the actual issues that contribute to sexual violence, I think that would be the most positive thing that we could see.
Thank you, Sophie. And again, a really powerful call to action there, particularly around training and the sort of the sustainability and efficacy in evaluation around training as one tool for culture change. It's not. It's got to be there and embedded with a whole range of other activities as well. And last but very not least, Natasha, would you mind adding your views onto this one?
Yeah. Now it's my turn to sort of scramble for points that haven't already been made. Really great points. So thank you. Especially, I think a lot of what I would want to say sort of builds on Sophie's points. I mean, I would say that the key thing is to give students ownership of the culture that upholds the priorities, back to my sort of earlier point. So, and ensure that they're responsible for actively shaping that culture through, for example, really good consent training, and also being able to make decisions about kind of how an institution responds to sexual violence. And it does require us to be like really open about what's happened. And that can be really hard. But there are confidentiality considerations that can be navigated. But I think it's really important to sort of resist the tendency, the sort of the privacy and the hush tones that sort of characterize how we deal with sexual violence, to ensure that we can really learn from each incident, each case, and go about transforming our communities and our campuses. So I suppose instead of asking ourselves, or primarily asking ourselves, like, how do we make this go away? Whether that's, the story or the scandal or the particular person, the perpetrator, because, ultimately no one is disposable. Instead of asking ourselves that, why don't we ask ourselves as a whole community, how did we let this happen? How many people enabled in some small way this to take place? How can we stop it from happening again? And what are all of our roles in doing that? So for each incident, what we will be able to achieve is, instead of focusing on punishment as the outcome, we can focus on learning as the outcome. How is this incident an opportunity for us to transform our conditions to create safer, healthier, and kinder society for all of us?
That is a fantastic note on which to end our student and student representatives panel discussion. I would just like to thank all the panel members so much for your fantastic and really quite incredibly thoughtful, but also really inspiring inputs. So if we were in a room together, there would be 300 people clapping you right now. So Natasha, Sophie, Maisha and Amanda, an enormous thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to move us on to a session where we're going to do a deeper dive into the independent evaluation that we have commissioned to understand the impact of the Statement of Expectations. So I'd like to introduce Helen Baird from SUMS Consulting, who is going to be sharing her plans for the evaluation and the insights that she has gained so far. So I'll hand over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Amy. Could you move on to the first slide, please? Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Baird from SUMS Consulting. I'm just going to tell you a bit about the evaluation of the Statement of Expectations, which is underway at the moment. So we started the evaluation back in March, and it will go on until after the summer break, probably to the end of September this year. The aims of the evaluation really are about looking at how universities, colleges, providers have responded to the Statement of Expectations, hearing from students, as we've just been doing, which has been really helpful, student unions, student representatives, on whether things have actually changed, what impact has the Statement of Expectations had so far from their perspective, and looking at whether any further changes might be needed in this area as well. So we're taking a mixed modes approach to the evaluation. We've got lots of research and consultation with the sector planned, and some of which is underway at the moment. So we're looking at all of the existing literature and documents and initiatives that have been sort of completed in recent times over the last few years, looking at the data, which we've been hearing about today, and then undertaking a lot of consultation over the next couple of months in particular before the summer break. So we're doing a large sample of provider survey, which will go out this week. We're doing case study research with individual providers, roundtable discussions, talking to students and representatives and their survivors through focus groups and interviews, engaging more broadly across the sector with sector stakeholders and lots of the academic and other experts in harassment and sexual misconduct to feed in their views as well. We've also set up an informal expert advisory group, which is comprised of representatives from the NUS, from UUK, Universities UK, AMOSSHE, and also some practitioners and experts in this area as well, who will be consulting with them in regular intervals just to share our findings and discuss potential areas of recommendation that are going to come out of the evaluation. And then the plan is that there'll be an initial report published in July from the evaluation, and then another one later on towards the end of September, early October. So that's all the sort of work that we're engaging in at the moment. Could you move on, please? Thank you. So the themes for the evaluation that we're considering, I mean, really what we're looking at is the overall impact of the, or the early impact, initial impact, I guess, of the overall Statement of Expectations in its entirety, and how, whether and you know, in what ways it might be contributing to more effective systems and policies and processes amongst providers, within providers. So we're looking at the sort of the impact of it overall, what you know, in terms of its approach to how it's been disseminated, looking at the individual elements that you can see there in the diagram. So as Amy was saying, the first four are very much around prevention, taking that whole organisation approach, the governance and leadership, engaging students in the co-creation of policies and processes, which the students were just talking about now. And also, came up a lot in the last session there, was about training, student and staff training, but awareness raising as well. And then also very much looking at, you know, those points 5 to 7, which is about reporting and disclosures, and also the provision of support to students. So I guess the challenge is really, there's a couple of real challenges for this evaluation. The first is that it's, you know, it's obviously been a very short time scale since the Statement of Expectations was introduced. So the consultation was announced initially before COVID hit in January 2020, and then it was published last year in April 21. So it's quite a short period of time to look at, you know, what impact there might have been given that time frame. And then the other challenge really is just trying to understand and unpick what the contribution of the Statement of Expectations has been from all the other changes that have been going on in the sector and also in society more generally over that period. So obviously, a sort of key one is the COVID pandemic and the effect that it's had on the sector, with the move to sort of teaching and student support and processes moving online. The increases in incidents of harassment and sexual misconduct that we've been hearing about earlier. And then the fact that there have been lots of other interventions and initiatives over the same period as well. So things like University UK's work and the various guidance that's been issued over the period. Various other organisations have done similar things. So really trying to, our job really will be trying to understand and unpick what effect this statement of expectations really has had, and what might need to happen next. Could you move on, please, the final slide? So final thing really to tell you a bit about today is what the opportunities are to take part in the evaluation. We're very keen to include as many people and talk to as many people as possible over the next couple of months before the summer break. So things that we've got planned this week on Thursday, we're going to be issuing our OFS, Office for Students, will be issuing on our behalf an online survey to a large sample of 100 higher education providers. And the sample's been organised so that it covers a good mix of different types of organisation, different sizes, different locations, and so on. And it won't be it's not a very onerous survey or anything, but the sort of higher response rate we get to that, the better, really, and giving us really good evidence to look at about how universities and colleges have responded to the statement of expectations, and that we'll also be able to compare it with the results of some earlier survey work that was done a few years ago by Universities UK. Second thing that we're going to be doing over the next month or two is doing some more sort of detailed case study research with individual providers, and we'll be sending out invitations for those over the next week or so as well, to really spend some time finding out in a bit more detail how institutions have been taking this forward. So talking to everyone from sort of members of governing bodies, leaders in institutions, the practitioners, as well as with students and with the partners of providers as well. So those will be taking place from the end of this month, probably into early July time. We're also planning to have a number of roundtable discussions with practitioners and sector stakeholders and experts, probably in June. And ideally, we'll hold those as in-person events if we can. And they'll be very much focusing on the three different areas. So looking at policies and processes, responding actions, and also student support as well. And the last couple of things we're going to be doing, so in fact, we've got coming up this month a couple of online focus group discussions for members of student unions, other student representatives on the 24th and the 30th of May. And we'll be sort of publicising information about those in the next day or so. But we really want to focus on their perspective to find out what changes they've seen over this period. And then finally, and crucially, we're really keen to speak to as many of the student campaign groups as possible, and also conduct some sensitive and confidential interviews with survivors to ensure that their voices are heard in this process. And it's very much, it's not at all to discuss the incidents that have taken place or anything like that. It's just really to make sure that we get their views on their experiences of disclosing and reporting to their institutions, and what that experience has been like, and to be able to feed that into the evaluation as well. So that's all the sort of opportunities that there will be to take part in the research for the evaluation. If you would like to take part in anything, if you want to get in touch with me or find out any more information, my email address is on the screen there. Please do feel free to get in touch with me, and I look forward to speaking to as many of you all as possible over the next coming weeks and months. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. We've just popped your contact details into the chat box, and we've also put up a link if you would like to find out more about the evaluation as it's going forward. And we're really excited to see how that project shapes up and the type of evidence that that it generates. So some fantastic work there by Helen and the team at SUNS. So for our final session, we'll be having a panel question and answer, taking questions from the audience. Many of these have already been submitted through the Q&A box, so thank you for doing that, and please keep on doing it, because I've got a team of wonderful colleagues who are in the background and sorting out and pulling out those questions for me to put to our panel members. So if I could ask the panel members now to turn on their cameras so that the delegates can see you. So I'd like to welcome back John Blake, our Director of Fair Access and Participation at the OFS, who you've already heard from this afternoon. I'm also very pleased to be joined by Simon Lee, who is the Vice Chair of AMOSSHE, the Association of Managers of Student Services in Higher Education. We've also got Debra Humphris, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Brighton, and we're joined by Emma Douthwaite, my colleague from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team, who is our policy lead for safeguarding and welfare. So I'm hoping we've now sort of moved to the gallery view we have, and we can see everyone together. So what I will do is start sort of working through the questions. I've got a bit of a steer as to who might be best placed to be directed to each question. So just bear with and unmute yourself when it comes to you. So I'm going to throw our first question to my OFS colleagues. And that is, do we plan to measure universities and colleges on the statement of expectations and how they are meeting them? Who would like a first run at that one, John or Emma?
I'm happy to go for Amy. It's a really good question, and I think really builds on what Helen's just talked about in terms of the evaluation of the statement of expectations. At this point, we're really open to the findings that Helen and the team come up with. We really want to know and understand properly the impact of the statement of expectations. And as we've talked about, that's impact on providers, systems, policies and processes, but also on how students experience those systems, policies and processes. So in terms of next steps after that, so Helen and the team are due to complete that initial evaluation and publish their final report in autumn of this year. And it will really be at that point that we look to develop what our next steps will be. We're not preempting what the findings of that evaluation will be. So we're not developing firm plans at the moment for what we will do. I think we've been quite clear, though, that if we haven't seen sufficient progress in the development of adequate and effective systems, policies and processes, then we will look to connect that to our regulatory framework.
John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you've heard enough from me already. I'll add when I've got useful things to add, but I think Emma summed up very, very well where we are.
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Emma. Okay, next question. And I'm going to direct this towards Simon and Debra. And it might be an interesting one to take both your views on. This question is from Joe Taylor, Acting Head of Student Services at BIM Manchester. So, and he said to us that the issue they face is that students are often understandably reluctant to make a formal complaint, particularly around sexual harassment. And they've had negative feedback when they've explained they're unable to reprimand students who've allegedly committed abuse without the formal report and subsequent investigation. Any advice or experience to share on that kind of anonymous reporting and what you can do with that? Because I understand that can be a real challenge, but it's understandably a real challenge to get students to go down the formal route where names are named, etc. Who would like to have a first run at that? Debra, please.
Thank you. I just before I say anything else, just want to say a huge thank you to the student panel who remind us all about the importance of all the work that we're doing. I mean, in terms of a student who has a complaint, so we keep going back to the piece about the culture in the organisation and the culture that we all create, and the strong points that were made about sort of, you know, some of my colleague my colleagues who may not see the world from the view of others, and how we create a world in which an organisational culture in which people feel comfortable and confident and supported to report. So certainly at the University of Brighton, we were working on this before the Statement of Expectations came out, but it's a really strong supportive framework for it. We have a campaign called #NeverOK. So students can divulge and name themselves, they can divulge and ask for confidentiality, or they can divulge and not give us any of their identifying characteristics, so that we have a range of data so that we can look at patterns around where incidents are happening. If a student comes through #NeverOK and complains, then that support, that confidence, that confidentiality is absolutely vital if we're going to pursue a case and an investigation and make a meaningful change in the organisation. And equally, I think what was Natasha put, which was really, really important, is about what we learn from every single incident and all the data that we generate.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I think I agree with everything Deborah's just said there. I think there's another couple of things worth mentioning. I think the first one is this space really demonstrates the importance of a wellbeing counsellor mental health support team based within Student Services Department of the university. And in my experience and that of my colleagues, it is very much the case that people are reluctant to meet these reports, but actually we found that with the correct support from a central wellbeing service, quite often you can move a student into a place where he or she is prepared to make that report, because their confidence is growing, they feel certain they've got the support around them. It's also really important to mention it's not just about the support we can offer within universities. There are a huge number of community-based support groups who are available, and we refer out quite often to those specialist services, the one in Sunderland being Wearside Women in Need. And we often find as well with students who get support from those external agencies, actually they come back into the university and say, I've had this conversation with the external provider, I'm now ready to make that report. So it really is about supporting students to build their confidence in the system in order that they can make that report with necessary support and feel believed, but also feel confidence that the university will respond appropriately.
That support piece is absolutely vital. Thanks for reminding us about that, Simon. That's very much an intrinsic part, actually, for all parties, as we've set out in our statement of expectations. Simon and Deborah, I wonder if we can stay with you for some further thoughts. And this is a question from Anna Johns. The statement of expectations requires proactive and meaningful engagement with students in developing processes and procedures. So I think we've all been talking about that today in student engagement. Could you talk about any examples of effective practice in this area that you've perhaps been involved with? And she said they are facing some challenges in that area.
Simon, do you want to lead off?
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, I think for me in this space, there's a huge amount of work for universities to be doing around a range of co-creation projects with students. And I think it's not necessarily just within sexual violence, sexual harassment arena. I think that the mental health chart has made that very clear as well. There's a huge piece of work to be done between students and their universities around promoting positive mental health. My personal view on perhaps the most effective developments I've seen around student involvement really are around the bystander intervention projects. I think this offers a wide range of opportunities for students to get involved right across the spectrum, be that from, sort of, if we're looking at sports clubs and perhaps that kind of masculine approach, somebody to say to their mate, come on, this is getting too much, take them out of the way, or for somebody to feel they actually intervene and make that difference. So I think certainly from my point of view, if we want to look at co-creation with students, one of the best places to start looking is the bystander projects.
Thanks, Simon. In terms of student engagement, and it's incredibly important in terms of how we shape what we've done. I mean, in our #NeverOK campaign, which has been overseen and led brilliantly by Pat Rangles, our Head of Student Services. We've had student involvement all the way through in that process of creating that framework of looking at data. We get feedback from students that use the services, and we take all of that seriously. I have immense gratitude for our Students' Union. So Brighton Students' Union has played a fantastic role in helping us. And we stand together. So it's the university and the Students' Union. It's often, it can be, we're all in this together is very much our attitude. And we started hashtag Never Okay with students, but we've now moved that on to include staff as well, because I have colleagues who feel harassed for a whole range of reasons or experience harassment and sexual misconduct. So it's really a commitment to playing and working as one team, and that mutual respect of taking each other seriously, which I think is absolutely vital.
Thank you, Deborah. I think our reflection on the student engagement that we do, it doesn't always end up where you think it's going to, and that's fantastic. I think it's often a genuinely very creative, way of working, and we've really valued all the inputs we've had from students in developing our work in this area. Simon, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Amy. I just really wanted to reiterate as well that certainly from my point of view, that the vital importance of student engagement is reflective of the beauty of the higher education sector, which is that all providers are very different. And our student bodies, certainly in my current university, looks very different than the ones in previous organisations where I've worked. And I think as a result of that, the challenges in terms of offering support, relative interventions and all the rest are different for each institution. So I think it's absolutely vital that we embed that student voice, because it will sound very different in each different organisation. And I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach works. So the importance of that student voice to me is absolutely crucial.
I think that's a great point, and actually, I think there's possibly a comment in the Q&A around we do have a huge diversity of institutions in the 400 plus providers who are on the OFS register, all the way from large civic institutions, multi-faculty that yourself and Deborah are kind of more familiar with, right through to very small specialist, conservatoire environments, religious formation environments, business formation. So very, very hugely diverse sector, and those students will have different needs, different interests and different perspectives. Fantastic, thank you for those inputs. I'm going to move us on. A question for Emma and John, and this has come in from Clarissa Humphris from Durham University, who has, I think she's picking up on some of the input from Sophie earlier around concerns of along the concerns. Sorry. Get my words right. Along with concerns of silencing survivors through NDAs and confidentiality clauses, many providers are refusing to share the outcome of disciplinary processes, including sharing the sanctions imposed against reporting parties, which stops survivors from understanding what has happened at the end of their case and what action the university have taken. What's the OFS's position on sharing outcomes and sanctions with reporting parties? As these are often are a direct result of the harm caused to the reporting party. Is this position different if the responding party is a student or an employee? There's quite a lot there to unpick, but I know we've certainly been asked this question before. Emma, do you want to take a first run at this, and then I might see whether Simon and Deborah have any experience here to share as well.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I was really interested by that discussion earlier and that kind of point. And obviously from I think a student and a victim survivor point of view, they want to know what's happened to the outcome of their report to the institution. That's kind of a really fundamental element for them of understanding what's happened, of processing what's happened. And earlier, other panelists were talking about the limitations of NDAs, students feeling like they're not able to move on from that process. So I really understand from a student and a victim survivor point of view how they would want that information for their own process of moving forwards. We do know that from then you come back to the kind of legal side and regulatory side, it's a really thorny issue, and particularly with GDPR regulations, we know that institutions have felt that particular barrier in being able to share the information, even if institutions themselves do want to share that information. In our final, I suppose, statement of the statement of expectations, the 7th statement, we're really clear that we expect institutions to ensure that students involved in any investigatory process have access to appropriate and effective support, and that's both for the reporting and responding parties. And we in our kind of sub-bullet points, we talk about the need for appropriate protocols for timely communications, again with both reporting and responding parties. Our principle, part of the principles for us is that we would want to see that again, reporting and responding parties are provided with an outcome of the investigatory process where the provider is able to share this information, or an explanation of any actions the provider has taken or even not taken. Just knowing what has happened, it can be useful even if it's a non-action as a result of the complaint. As Amy's kind of touched on, as we've talked about, that we regulate a highly diverse set of institutions, and so that is why the statement of expectations is kind of intentionally set at this very high level. We are aware that Universities UK are developing some more detailed guidance on information sharing, which will hopefully kind of address some of Clarissa's questions, like we say, some really thorny issues there, about how information can be shared with both reporting and responding parties.
Emma, and that information sharing guidance I think will be incredibly useful. I know it's been a tough job to pull that together, but I know they're also working with the Information Commissioner's Office to really get some strong guidance and hopefully some supportive guidance out there for the sector to use on these cases. Just throwing that to Debra and Simon in case there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I can. It is incredibly tricky space currently, and I'm really looking forward to the UK guidance, which should be out incredibly soon, and the legal advice that goes with that. So I'll share with you a case. I had a member of staff who there was an accusation from students about sexual misconduct, took it absolutely seriously, investigated it, dismissed the individual member of staff without a reference, just dismissed, gone. Zero tolerance, you can't be in my university. So person exited swiftly. The only thing I could say legally to the students was that because that individual still has rights, regardless of what anybody else might think, was that the individual was no longer an employee of the university. And the really important thing, I think, that students felt content about that. They wanted to know more, and then you're in a situation where you say, well, actually I can't tell you anymore because that individual has legal rights under employment law and under GDPR. Just be assured this person is no longer an employee of this university. But I deliberately had a conversation with a member of staff, a junior member of staff, so going back to those power dynamics, a junior member of staff who had the courage to step forward, and it was a really difficult situation for them to basically out this person's behaviour. And I personally went and spoke to that individual and thanked him, because if we're going to create the culture in which people feel comfortable to be able to speak the truth, then we have to also support people when they do, even when it's in a, especially when it's in that sort of unequal power dynamic. And he was extremely grateful for my intervention. It's the very, very least I could have done for his courage.
Debra, I'm going to move on. I've got a question which could be for Emma or Simon. So if you both sort of prick up your ears on this one. And we've had a couple of anonymous questions from from people who are from smaller higher education institutions, and we've talked about some of those already in terms of representing the diversity of the sector that we regulate. And they may not have, you know, departments of people or teams available to deal with these issues. And some in larger institutions, I know that they can kind of split and handle the kind of reporting and responding parties sort of separately. And that may not be possible in smaller institutions. What advice might we have for an institution like that with quite small student numbers, small numbers of staff, where issues around confidentiality and finding, you know, that enough kind of impartial people to run investigations and disciplinary panels might be quite challenging? Do we have any thoughts we'd like to share on that? Simon, you've unmuted. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think I'd probably answer in a similar vein to previously with, you know, calling on external support as appropriate. I totally take the point that in many cases, a smaller institution may struggle to have those specialist skills. Actually, I don't think that's unique to smaller institutions. I think a lot of larger institutions also don't have those specialist skills. And it's only relatively recently that we're starting to see specialist investigation officers being recruited into the sector. I understand there are external consultants that can be brought in terms of specialist investigations. That could be one option. And in terms of supporting the students, again, I would suggest, if your central support department is too small to separate the reporting student and the alleged perpetrator, then, you know, please look to see who's in your community. There are a wealth of specialist organisations out there, very, very experienced and able to provide excellent support. So please don't think you're on your own on this. This is not just a university issue, it's a societal issue. I think it occurs in universities, absolutely, because we're part of society. But as part of that, those mechanisms are out there. Please draw on them.
Thanks, Simon. I think that's a really good point around community engagement as well. There are and the sort of some of the support and referral pathways that you might be able to tap into in your local community. Rape crisis centres, the sexual assault referral centres, local NHS and mental health services, local charities. Who are offering support and hate crime reporting centres as well. So there is a lot of local support. They're under a lot of pressure. They're under a huge amount of pressure, and so sometimes thinking about how to resource that you know, those inputs from community organisations as well is probably an ethical way to proceed. I'm going to move on. I've got a really interesting question that I'm going to direct probably primarily towards John and Debra, as they are the people from our sort of leadership positions who are here today. So specialist staff, practitioners who are really willing and really keen to change policy and procedures, implement, you know, new resources, and, you know, support students, and really want to get the statements of expectations embedded in their institutions. But, you know, institutions are hierarchical places, and sort of people in those kind of more junior or middle management positions might experience pushback or lack of support from senior staff, or perhaps lack of resources. So, you know, what would you say to practitioners out there who are working hard to make change, but perhaps aren't getting the support they need at the top levels? What can they do to mobilise that?
So maybe I could speak as a Vice-Chancellor, the only one here. I think it's really clear. It's down to leadership and strategy. So as a openly gay woman who's experienced harassment in the past, many years ago, because I'm gazillions of years old, but you never forget it. And so in everything that you do, that you bring to your leadership, I think it's really important that you bring those values. We've got 4 core values, and one of those is inclusivity. So how do we make this an inclusive environment for all of our staff and students? And I have the great fortune of having not just great colleagues at a senior level, but great colleagues all the way through my organisation. So my head of student support, my student counsellors at all levels, residential advisors. It's how do you get that culture into everybody? So every single one of us creates the culture of the organisation. There isn't somebody somewhere who's more important than anybody else. And I think as a Vice-Chancellor, you need to have the courage and the humility to be really clear that I can't just send out a directive and it will change culture. It doesn't work like that. We have to keep going at these values to create an organisation where we respect everybody, we call it out when it's not right, and we create a safe environment for students who maybe don't feel confident or support, so that they feel supported to speak their truth. I'll stop, otherwise I should just occupy the rest of this meeting.
Debra, and you have very succinctly described, by saying everyone creates the culture, you've described what a whole institutional approach looks like. That's, you know, number one on the statement of expectations, and I thank you for that. John, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to reiterate that point, I mean, ultimately, shifts in culture do not happen if they are not owned by senior leadership, but even then they will not happen if they are not spread throughout an organisation. I think, to make a slightly wider point, I think about what strikes me listening to this and having doing the work that we're doing, is that it's very easy for this work to become, everyone thinks it's terribly worthy, but it's sort of, it's done by people who use words like safety and inclusion, and those sort of people are very nice, but they're sort of somewhere else. And there's a very particular type of person that does that, and we should all, you know, that those people will take care of it. And I think the need to understand that what we're talking about here isn't inclusion or safety or well-being, it's justice. It's a profound sense of what it means to be in a civic institution and see and experience a sense of justice and fair treatment and fair dealing. And I think in some ways the most, I wouldn't say concerning because I can see where it has come from, but I think it does worry me when we talk about the difficulties and the mistrust of our police and other authorities. And I think institutions need to understand that they are mistrusted for lack of concern with honesty or fair dealing, but that's not something we can solve by going around the institutions. It's something we have to solve by going through them. We have to create an environment in which authority can be trusted. And in some ways, this touches on some of the stuff that Debra was just talking about, even when the outcomes are not the outcomes that people wish to see, either because we can't share that information, or in some cases because, you know, many of the cases we talked about here are absolutely crystal clear where the wrong is. But there are cases in which, and we know this from, you know, I'm not wildly keen to crack open the free speech can of worms in the course of this afternoon, but there are absolutely points where what is legally permissible speech and what is experienced as unacceptable meet in a way that is not something we can resolve on ourselves alone. So sometimes people will get adverse judgments that don't meet, that they don't feel express their needs and wants, and we need to build that trust in institutions. So this isn't a matter of something that is done because, you know, inclusivity is itself a nice thing. Of course it is, and that should be a driver, but also because it is fundamental. Trust and belief in the institution and its capacity to do work and do that work fairly is absolutely fundamental to the success of any educational institution. And if it degrades, it won't simply be those students who feel misled or mistreated who will suffer. We all will, because we will not be able to sustain an educational institution in which people can meet, share ideas in a you know, a bold and forthright manner, but also in the sense of learning, because we will just not be able to sustain that forum for it to happen. I think that the core principle of ensuring that justice is done and that justice is seen to be done, and that those who are organising and instituting that justice are fair, open and transparent, is essential not just to inclusion and to tackling harassment and misconduct, but to the whole operation and purpose of universities as educational and civic institutions.
Well, that feels like a kind of closing question. I feel like I need to that's good. Some big points there. I really like the one about trust in the institution and belief in the institution, and I think that works both ways. It's about also trusting students and believing students when they're coming.
And I'm not for a moment
No, no.
I can entirely see why that problem has emerged. I live in London. I live in a city where there are genuine and profound problems with our policing networks, and that's really worrying. And I am acutely aware that I am absolutely in none of the demographics who are likely to experience that. But by God, does it worry me? But I don't think the answer could be to go around it. It has to be to go through it, and we have to do that collectively. And I think, we have to harness everyone's voice, and everyone needs to see that as part of their role. I suppose the point that I was trying to make about who does this work in particular, I think it's interesting if you look, I don't know if anyone else has looked at the participant list for this meeting. The participant list for this meeting is, I think I'm right in saying, by overwhelmingly female. And almost any questions about sexual misconduct, violence, or more general inclusion tend to attract a much more, a very particular audience, generally made up of women, as though this is sort of, well, that work is that it's being done, and the rest of us are therefore excused the need to engage, particularly those of us who don't have protected, many of the most at-risk protected characteristics. But it's essential that everyone do this, because it's our world too. My children have to grow up in this, their friends have to grow up into it. And I think getting that balance right between hearing and valuing the voices of those who've been marginalized, but also harnessing and building on the power of those who already do have the capacity to speak is absolutely essential. And it's why I think it's very easy for people to put pressure on the OFS to say, you must do more, do it now. It's like, we have to go at the speed that we can do this right. Because if we do it wrong, it won't be me who suffers, but the people who do suffer will suffer in ways that we can barely imagine.
And we hold that issue very heavily. I will say that we do not treat that lightly in any of the work we do, but particularly in this space, we take that extremely seriously. I'd like to move us on to a question which is open to the panel. So please just unmute when you would like to make an input. Around, we're 1 year on. What do you think has changed?
I think I might start as somebody who wasn't here and wasn't leading HE when it started, to say that my sincere hope is that what we will see in the review is that we have seen more policies and procedures that are dealing with this work. But I think the alarming and disturbing reality is that even if responses by providers have improved, and we don't know yet that, the context in which that's happening is not getting any better. Indeed, it's getting worse, and that's why I brought in that rapid review data from Ofsted's work. Those are appalling statistics. And ones that, I recall when I was in schools, early in my career, I worked for somebody who became a head of year, and we had a case where a girl had shared an explicit photograph with her boyfriend, and it had gone around the whole school, and this was a full court press. It was dealt with incredibly well by that, but it was a big thing. This had never happened before. I went back to see her a year later. I'd moved schools and said, do you have any more of those? She said, no, it happens every single day, all the time. The profound change that online culture has brought is something I think, I'm sort of slowly easing myself into conceptualizing myself as middle-aged and sort of grasping that generations below me may think things differently. But I think on this, we have to understand that the generation, I didn't grow up permanently connected to my friends and to the people who didn't like me in the whole world. And there is something going on there that is potentially enormously powerful, but also potentially extraordinarily damaging. And I do think we have to live with and have to consider the consequences of sort of the pornification of culture and gender relations and concepts of sex and consent that young people are experiencing. I wouldn't for a moment suggest, of course, problems of equality for women are ancient and difficult, but something new has risen. And no matter what work we do now, I think that is only going to become more problematic and demand more of us.
Debra.
I echo much of what John has said about universities exist and regulators exist within the society in which we're operating. And whilst there's a lot we can do for students and staff in the institution, I cannot control society and the external influences and those dynamics that people bring. And if they coming to university, they see a supportive environment that allows them to express those harms. A lot of those harms actually were never caused by the university, but we end up doing our bit to support people who've experienced some dreadful things that happen online and some dreadful harms. And I'm great that Emma Bond's work at Suffolk about online, the online space, but that is, as John said, that is their world now. And there is, to be frank, dear OFS, there is a limit to what my team and I can do about that external ghastly environment, other than to try our very best.
Sorry, I don't want to jump back into it, but I think, just to be clear, Deborah, I think we acknowledge that, we understand that's right, and I think it's also part of the question about what we do next. There are some things here, and I think it does come back in some ways to those questions of justice and how there are legal constraints. Some of those reflect legal ideas that we may need to reconceptualize as we look at what it means. The university is a different place now than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago, and clearly there is a limit even to what the regulator can do within that.
Thanks, John and Deborah. Simon?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I would disagree with John and Deborah at all. I think things have moved on significantly since we were students. But I am encouraged. I'm the father of 2 teenage boys, and they're both receiving consent training already at school. One of them's only 12. And that training has actually been using the benefit of technology. They've both seen the tea and consent video, which I know is quite short and I know is quite well shared across our sector. But actually, I'm really encouraged that it's being disseminated to a younger age group as well. So I would accept that. I think we are not in a fantastic place at the minute, but I'm reassured that our colleagues in sort of secondary school education are doing their bit as well. So hopefully we'll start to see some changes coming through the system in the next few years. I think in terms of the statement itself, the feedback we've had from our members at AMOSSHE is that actually in terms of support students, we've been working in this place for a long time. The first AMOSSHE event around sexual assault actually took place back in 2016. And we funded some research back then into how to more effectively manage sexual assault disclosure. So we've been working on this for quite a long period of time. And of course, we all responded to the UK guidance as well around changing the culture. What our members feel has actually changed since the statement of expectations is that it's brought staff more into the mix, and it's brought this more to a whole university approach in a stronger way than perhaps it was previously. And we would see that as being a overall very positive, and I think amongst our members the statement's been very well received.
Simon, any final comments from you, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, again, as with the earlier panel session, I feel like a lot of really important points have been made. I suppose like you, Amy, I'm an optimist, so I try and think of where we could be heading, and acknowledging that where we are as a society right now it certainly doesn't feel great. But I think, like Simon said, there's a lot of work going on in the secondary level, probably even primary school level as well, to discuss about consent, about engaging kindly with your peers, even if it is in debate. It doesn't need to degrade into hateful speech. And I think with the statement as well, we were really keen to try and focus on that prevention. And I think acknowledging that while there's a whole range of students in higher education, there are a large proportion in the kind of young category, in the 18, 19, 20, 21 category. And I think there's a real opportunity for higher education institutions to set out behavioural expectations. These are young people coming to a place where they may be experiencing far more independence than they ever have. It is a shift from how their lives may have been in secondary education, probably living at home with parents, carers, brothers, sisters, and they're out on their own without that network. And I think universities and colleges have a real community and kind of can support students in developing what behaviours they will see as appropriate and see as right. So just to try and be a bit more positive, I just try to be hopeful that the work, we know that extensive work is being carried out by universities and colleges, and like we say, the secondary sector as well. So hoping that setting those behavioural expectations right from the start, even before your students set foot on campus or set foot on your virtual campus, at enrolling point, being clear that these kinds of behaviours are unacceptable, can really, I think, pave the way for that healthy community.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. Thank you to all our panel this afternoon. It's been an incredibly stimulating and inspiring discussion. Some very important points have been made, but also hopefully we've sort of grounded that in the work that the OFS are doing, and that you'll be going away this afternoon with a better idea of what's happening next. So that brings today's event to a close. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for all your contributions, and thank you to Leicester, Suffolk and Bath universities for providing us with such fantastic videos. Thanks to all of you. We've had around 300 attending at various points throughout this afternoon's session, which is just wonderful, and for your great questions. We really do appreciate your attendance and engagement with us this afternoon. I wanted to say a massive thanks to the Office for Students Backstage team of Abigail, Beth, Mel and Fern, who've been keeping us all online and responding to questions as we've been going along. So thank you to the team. As mentioned, the event recording will be shared on the OFS website once it is ready, and that should be in the next few days. And our colleague Abigail has just shared in the chat the URL of where it will be posted. We're really keen to hear your feedback. We hope you've enjoyed the event this afternoon, and you will be, and if you've agreed to be contacted for this purpose, you'll receive a survey by email. Alternatively, please do send any comments you might have to events@officeforstudents.org.uk. I'm sure that address will go up into the chat as well. And I just leaves it to me to say good afternoon, have a lovely evening, everybody, and I hope to see you all again soon.